Okay.
Yeah, they don't have permission to turn on their camera or.
Oh, I see. I see. So that's a new function I didn't know. There are always something to learn.
So right now we have 13 participants on, and I know that we have a little over 20 that are registered. So we'll just give just a few minutes. All right, we have 16 participants on. Andy Fless is the president of P45, and we're having a little trouble getting him connected. He was going to start this off and introduce folks, so I'm going to do that instead, just to get going. Welcome everybody. This is the third session in the series this summer of Fridays. This is hosted by P45 and MSU Extension. MSU Extension is co-hosting with P45, and just a reminder that all of our programs are open to all. Just a little housekeeping. I think we're all familiar with Zoom by now, but if you want to ask a question of our speaker today, you can click down here on the question and answer and type your question in the box. I'll be monitoring that. You can also send a message by clicking on the chat. If it doesn't show up on the bottom, you just need to hover your mouse over the bottom and click on that. So you can either type a message in the chat or ask a question in the Q&A. And we'll go along and try to answer those questions as best we can. You can also click on your screen, it will say raise hand. So you can click raise your hand, and we can unmute you if you have a more complicated question that you'd like to ask. So now I'm going to turn it over to our speaker to do some self-introductions and get started. Thank you.
Thank you, Annette. So Annette, if you could stop your screen sharing, then I can start mine.
Yep. Oh, I see Andy's on the call now. Welcome, Andy. Did you have any, before we get started did you have any P45 announcements you needed to make? Okay. I guess not. We'll get back with Andy. No worries.
Sure. Thank you so much, Annette. And thank you, Andy, for hosting my presentation. So I'm Wei Zhang. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Plant, Soil, and Microbial Sciences at Michigan State. So did all you hear my voice okay? All right, so my research area is soil physics, but I do some interdisciplinary research in soil chemistry and microbiology as well. So today I'm gonna share some of what I know about biochar, and I also take this opportunity for me to learn from you, from the audience. Obviously, I'm not very familiar with vineyard and viticulture, so this will be a wonderful opportunity for me to learn from you folks as well. So this is the outline of my today's presentation. So I will talk a little bit about what I know about biochar, how we produce it, and then some of the environmental agronomic benefits and the use of biochar. And I did do some study by myself, so I learned a couple of special cases about biochar application in vineyard. So I'll share those with you today. Then I will talk about the important things to remember about producing and using biochar, and we'll end with a question discussion. So I'll make sure I leave plenty of time for question discussion because as I said earlier, I take this as a wonderful opportunity for me to learn from you and also share with you what I think about biochar. So let's start with a little bit of history. I think some of you are probably know about this if you are interested in biochar before. And biochar is a kind of a ancient soil practices. It's called terra preta, and it was found in Amazon basin. So as you can see in this picture here, so this is an early settlement of villagers in Amazon. As you can see, there's a road lead to this settlement, and then there's often there's a patches of a fertile soil outside of this settlement. So this is a reconstruction of the villages of the settlement. As you can see, there's some patches of land that's good for crop growth. As we know that in Amazonian basin, the soil is in tropical soils. So the soil is typically oxide soil. It's enriched with iron and aluminum oxides. So those soil has very low fertility. Basically has a pretty low nutrient availability. So if you grow corn, for example, on that soil, this is how the corn gonna look like. But in the soil, it's called a terra preta, and this is how the corn look like. If you look at the profile of the soil, as you can see, this is a very typical of oxide soil, like a tropical soil, and this is terra preta, and the soil with a biochar. It's more dark and has a more organic matter. And if we look at the soil here, look at this really interesting soil profile of terra preta. And you can see there's some remains of a remaining evidence of a human settlement. So it was suggested that when the villagers actually cook their meal, they would spread the ash around the land, like a surrounding land. So that's why we see some of this relic of early settlement. So this is the evidence indicate that the fertile dark soil in Amazonia basin clearly is a management choice by the villagers during that time. So in fact, this kind of practice is not only happening in Amazonian basin, so it was actually happening worldwide. As you can see the picture here, this is an ancient rice farming in China. So the farmers would burn the rice stores and then spread that rice store into the rice paddy. And even nowadays, this kind of practice is still widespread. As you can see, probably you know that the burning of the sugarcane before harvesting. So this is a picture in Florida. And then around the world, there's still the practice of burning crop residue. Of course, burning the crop residues or biomass creates some of the air pollution problem. It's also not a wise use of the resources of the biomass because you just burn them without maximize its economic value. So that gets us to biochar technology. So I borrowed this diagram from Dr. Jessica Meisel. So Dr. Meisel is a professor in our department. She's also interested in biochar, but she's more focused on the forest system. And we have a number of people on campus who are really interested in biochar. So focusing on the biology side of things, for example, Professor Lisa Tiemann in our department, and also production side of the biochar. Chris Saffron from Biosystem and Agriculture Engineering at MSU. So let's look at this diagram. As you can see, let's start with the biomass management. So the biomass can be either burned by fire. So this fire could be wildfire or managed fire. Or we can use a engineering process called pyrolysis to convert biomass into energy, bioenergy, and also or biochar. So this is clearly the management choices we can make. And then we can use this technology in the agriculture and the forest system, and possibly the viticulture system. And then that has benefits on our water, nutrients, and food production. On the larger scale, you can have impact on the climate change, which I will talk about later. So we think that biochar can be used to produce bioenergy from biomass, and then the biochar can be used as soil amendment to help with soil carbon storage, and to improve soil health, improve crop yield, increase water retention in soil, increase nutrient retention in soil, and help clean soil. So clearly, biochar is in the nexus of food, water, energy, health, and natural resources, right? So there's strong interest on biochar because of all these perceived benefits. So let's talk a little bit about how we produce biochar. So this is really important because the property of the biochar really depends on the feedstock materials and the production conditions. So let's first talk about some basic mechanisms. So there's 3 processes we need to be aware of. So pyrolysis, gasification, and combustion. So those chemical reactions happens when we heat the biomass up, so with the increasing temperature. So in this case, I want to use this flaming match as an example. So when we light the match, so when the temperature increases, the heat going to decompose the biomass to produce the pyrolysis gas. So if we have oxygen, and then that gas gonna be burned, so produce the combustion products. So when the flame passes a certain point on this match, depending on whether we still have oxygen here, and then the charred material going to either continue to burn or will just be baked without oxygen, right? So all this process happening with a flaming match can be engineered or mimicked to produce biochar in other situations. So for example, this is a gasification process to convert poultry manure into heat in the biochar. So this is a facility to pyrolyze the poultry manure. So the difference between the gasification and pyrolysis is really about the degree of the temperature. So gasification typically happens at a higher temperature, and also the amount of air or oxygen in the system. So with gasification, there's more air, and with pyrolysis, we try to minimize the oxygen amount, because with more oxygen, you would just burn the biomass. So you're left with the carbon dioxide and the heat. And so this is another system, and it can be used to produce biochar and the syngas, which is kind of form of bioenergy. And of course, all the system is rather high-tech, I would say, with engineering complexity. You can also produce biochar with using low-tech method. So for example, the soil peats is still the most ancient technique of making biochar, and it still can be widely practiced. And also you can use this kind of a corn kill to produce biochar. And here I want to actually pose an interesting question for you to keep in mind. So how should we quench the charcoal at the end when we're producing biochar? So I will leave this question here. We'll come back to this at the very end. So as I said earlier, the biochar going to be different depending on how we make them. And so that depends on the feedstock materials and the production condition. So in terms of production conditions, one important parameter is the temperature. The other one is the heating rate. So how fast we heat the biomass. So that could happen very slowly, or it can be happening very fast. As a result, we'll produce different kind of biochar. So not all biochar are produced equally. and they're probably going to vary a lot. As you can see, because their probably are different, we may expect different results when we try to use them in agriculture. So let's summarize the perceived benefits and use of a biochar. And so I really like this diagram because it kind of highlights some of the use of the biochar. For example, we can use it as an absorbent to retain nutrients and water in the soil, or even we can use to retain some toxic contaminants in soil. So those contaminants are not moving up to the crops. And then we can use it as a carbon sequestration agent to store carbon in soil. I will come back to this later. And then we can also combine biochar with other fertilizer to make a biochar fertilizers. And there are some other kind of innovative use of biochar. For example, it can be used as a building material, and you can mix them with concrete, or it can be used as a feed additive to animal feed, or it can be used as a fuel, like just burn the charcoal, right? Everyone has this experience having barbecue in the summer. So the charcoal is really a kind of a biochar because of the way they produced and the property of the charcoal. And the last thing I want to talk about this diagram is really, I like this inner part. So as you can see, biochar is made of different molecules and atoms, elements. So there are some basic science can be learned about this part. So to inform us how we can use it in other kind of applications. So let's talk about the bioenergy part. As I said earlier, the biochar can be produced as a bioenergy system, right? We convert the biomass through the pyrolysis into a biofuel or biogas, and then there's remaining solids byproduct is a biochar. Then we can return that biochar into soil. So this is really a circular system. And one of the things with the modern society is that we really don't recycle carbon dioxide very well. So as you can see, our crops or plants can synthesize the carbon dioxide into carbohydrate through photosynthesis, and then of course the plant's going to use some of the carbohydrate to for its own growth and its own energy, and essentially this system is a carbon neutral, because in a mature system, and the amount of carbon dioxide is taken from the atmosphere, and the amount of the crop used or plant used are essentially the same. So this is a kind of a mature forest system, and this will be different from your crop systems, which you will harvest the crop or the plants are actively growing, right? So in this mature system, it's kind of carbon neutral. You take no actual carbon dioxide from the atmosphere when you think about the whole system balance. But however, if we have a pyrolysis, we can remove some of the biomass, then we can use to produce bioenergy. Then we can actually produce some biochar. So we can store biochar in the soil. So we can actually store more carbon and take more carbon out from the atmosphere. And the other thing with what I said earlier about our society is not recycling carbon dioxide very well, or carbon very well, is because we're also using fossil fuel. So we burn the fossil fuel, convert it to the carbon dioxide, and which you release into the air, but we didn't recycle it. So I think into the future, the recycling part is really important. So the biochar can be a important way of doing that. So that's what we call the carbon sequestration benefits of a biochar. And then there's benefits on crop yield. So this is a study done by analyzing data set from a large number of published papers in peer-reviewed journals. So what they found is, by looking at this diagram, on average, when you apply biochar to soil, it can increase the crop yield by 10%. And then they also found that there is the greatest benefits for acidic and neutral pH soils. and in soils with a coarse and medium texture. So this is understandable because we know that most of the biochar has alkaline nature, so the pH is a little bit high. So you add that alkaline biochar into acidic soil, you're basically are doing liming. So it has a liming effect. So to kind of neutralize the acidity of the soil, so which will help the plant growth. And then in the coarse, medium texture, such as sandy soil, the biochar, because it has a very high porous structure, and you can actually improve the soil structure to help retain water and nutrients. And then the biochar can actually immobilize contaminants and retain nutrients. So this is based on its fundamental nature, right? So the biochar is highly porous, has a very high surface area, and also there's a lot of binding site on the surface, which can be used to bind organic molecules through fundamental chemical reactions. Or it can actually also use to bind cationic ions, either metals or other kind of anions, because the negative charge side can bind a positive charged ions. This positive charged ions can also bind a negative ions. So the biochar, if you apply biochar to soil, you can help the ion retention capacity of the soil. It could be either anions or cations. And so that's why we think biochar can help the nutrient retention. And so next, I'm going to share some of the results of our research. So this is a paper published by our lab in this year. So in this case, we want to look at whether adding biochar to soil going to reduce the uptake of a pharmaceutical by vegetable, in this case, radish. So we know that in some areas, the water contains pharmaceuticals, or in the animal manure or the sewage sludge, there are pharmaceutical in it. So when you apply the water and manure or biosolids or sewage sludge into the soil, it will also bring the pharmaceutical into the system, right? So in this study, this data shows that when we add a biochar into soils, we can reduce the uptake of pharmaceutical by radish. So in the diagram here shows the root concentration factor as a function of different biochar amendment. So the root concentration factor is defined as the concentration of pharmaceutical in radish roots divided by pharmaceutical concentration in soil. So the higher this number is, the greater uptake of pharmaceutical by radish. So here we found that when we add 0.1% and 1% biochar by weight into the soil, we can substantially decrease the pharmaceutical uptake by radish. And there are many things to consider when we add a biochar to soils. Because of the strong binding capacity of the biochar, it not only binds the toxic contaminants, but also binds some beneficial elements. So in this study, we show that when we add a biochar into the soil, it actually reduces the plant uptake of micronutrients, in this case, zinc. Zinc is a positively charged metal ions, and it's also an essential nutrient for humans. And in fact, there are a lot of efforts to try to increase zinc level in grains. So in this case, what we found is when we add a biochar to rice soil or in the wheat soil, we reduce the extractable zinc concentration in the soil. As a result, that reduced the uptake of zinc by the wheat grains. As you can see, when we add a biochar with a different amount, the amount of zinc taken out by wheat when rice grains are lower than the control without biochar. So you can also think, well, some metal ions may be actually harmful. For example, lead and cadmium. So those toxic heavy metals, if we add a biochar to the soil, if you are growing crops in that kind of site, and this biochar addition actually can reduce the uptake of toxic metals by crops, so which would be a benefit. So we have to think about when we adding back to the soils, what are the potential benefits and also negative consequences. So this is a study we published last year, and we know that biochar may contain inorganic contaminants, for example, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbon, PAH, and some of them are carcinogens. So when we add biochar to soils and then we grow crops out of that soil, so that pH going to be taken up by crops. However, we analyzed a large number of papers published in the past. What we found is the risk for cancer is pretty low if the application rate is low. So when the application rate is lower than 20 tons per hectare, the cancer risk because of the pH is low. So we think the health risk may be mitigated using a low application rate, or we can actually optimize in biochar production. And so produce biochar with a lower amount of pHs, or we can treat the biochar after production to reduce the level of pHs. Or I will come back to this later in this presentation. So the other application of biochar is a biochar-based fertilizer. So this diagram shows a way to produce a nitrogen fertilizer with biochar. And so there's a lot of interest in producing biochar fertilizers. This is because the biochar, let me say this, one of the hindrances for large-scale application biochar is cost, the economy, or economics. So if we combine the fertilizer with biochar, we may increase the price of biochar, and so that makes it a production of biochar more economically viable, and the farmers has also more incentive to use the biochar. So the fertilizer can be chemical fertilizer or organic fertilizer when it's combined with a biochar. In this case, this is a field study to looking at the difference in terms of the grain yield and also nitrogen uptake by crops when you just apply the chemical fertilizer or apply a biochar composite fertilizer. And so what you found here is the biochar fertilizer treatment has a much higher grain yield and biomass yield than chemical fertilizer. And then also I want to point out here is the uptake by the crops of nitrogen and is higher with biochar fertilizers. So clearly there's benefits with a biochar-based fertilizer. So as far as I can see it, there's a strong interest in academia and also industry about producing biochar-based fertilizer. So in this study shows to produce a slow release phosphorus fertilizer, so you can absorb biochar with phosphorus, and then as you can see, this biochar fertilizer is produce a better growth grass than the control. So those are some of the fertilizer aspect of with the biochar. So now I'll get to the point which most of you may be interested. So I want to share two stories on the use of biochar in vineyard. So these two studies were conducted in Switzerland by the same group, Peter Hans Schmidt from Ithaca Institute. So this is the first study. Basically, they have several treatments. So they have a in the vineyard, so they have legume cover crop, and then the legume cover crop applied with compost, and then the legume applied with compost plus biochar. So what you see here is with the biochar, the diameter of the vein shoot is greater than with just the legume treatment. And also, interestingly, there's a much higher amino acid with the biochar treatment. As you can see here, this two shows much higher nitrogen content than the other two treatment for grapes. So I don't know much about grapes and vineyard or viticulture. So you folks can actually interpret it to see these results, to see whether it's beneficial or not. Finally, the extractable polyphenols are higher for the biochar treatment than the control. So this is interesting. The same group did another study on a very old vineyard, again, in Switzerland. And so what they found is throughout 3 years, there's no significant improvement in terms of the growth as well as the grape quality. So I don't gonna go to detail with this, but again, why in these two sites the results are different? So they argue that because in this vineyard it's pretty old, so when you apply the biochar on the topsoil with a shallow topsoil, maybe down to about 7 to 10 centimeter, and the biochar really didn't get to the roots of the vines, right? So if you don't get the biochar to the roots, and then the biochar cannot really produce benefits to the plants. And so essentially in this alkaline and temperate soils, and there's no immediate economic value for using biochar in that way. And so that brings a question, how you use biochar differently at different settings to make sure you maximize the benefits. And so there's a lot of consideration to go into that. Oh, another question is, now this soil is kind of temperate climatic zones, so temperate soils. A lot of research shows a lot of benefits in tropical, subtropical regions. So like we're in Michigan, we're in temperate zone. So how we can actually maximize the benefits of biochar by considering the particular soil and the climatic condition, or even the plant system conditions where you want to apply the biochar. So I'm finishing up. So this is my take-home message. It kind of also answer the question I left earlier. So let's look at this picture. So this is a two treatment. The first one is just pure biochar applications. The lower part is a composted biochar treatment. As you can see, the crops are different. The plants grow much better with a composted biochar than the pure biochar. If the pure biochar even produce some toxic effect at a higher rate. So why is that? I think a lot of early study with the biochar trial, either in the laboratory or in the field, they would just use the biochar as produced. And so they're kind of using pure biochar, which creates a lot of conflicting results. And so the take-home message is before you use your biochar, you need to charge in your biochar. So you need to activate the biochar. The reason is you want to increase the water nutrient storage, because as you can see, when the biochar is produced, it's a dry materials, and it doesn't have a lot of water. It does not have a lot of nutrients or like a dissolvable nutrients, and of course, obviously, it doesn't have any microorganisms, right? Because it will just heat it up, and so you want to inoculate a mechanism back biochar to make it a biological active. And then you want to increase the cation exchange capacity by oxidation of the surface of biochar. So this cation exchange capacity is really depends on the number of negative charged sites on the biochar surface. So by oxidize the biochar surface, you can increase the cation exchange capacity of the biochar, which in turn going to increase the ion retention. The ions could be either nutrients or other kind of toxic ions. So you're going to increase that retention capacity of the biochar. So really, it's important to activate the biochar before you use it. And there's a number of ways you can activate or recharging your biochar. So most common way is the composting, and you could either or you could actually mixing the biochar with mature compost. And then the second way is to mixing biochar with animal manure. So one of the interesting or innovative way is to actually using biochar as a bedding materials in the barn. And the third is a combined biochar with a liquid fertilizer. Or you can actually combine the biochar with the fermentation. And so the lower two pictures shows how you mix the biochar with the manure. So it's kind of strips about 120 centimeter, and then you spread the biochar at about 5 centimeter in depth. Then you mix manure with it, or you can ferment the biochar with the biomass. The final way is to activate it in soil. So this is probably explain why in some studies you don't see a benefit effect in the first year, or sometimes you even see an adverse effect in the first year. This is because the biochar need time to be activated. So it's really important that we charge or activate biochar before we use it. So I think that's my last slides. I already saw there are a couple questions. And so let's just go direct to question and discussion. Thank you for your time. And we should have enough time for the discussion. And as I said earlier, this is a wonderful opportunity for me to learn from you what your leads are, what question you have, and how we can kind of learn from each other and work with each other. So I want to thank Andy and Pete45 to host my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Wei. So thank you for your nice presentation. I have a very basic question. You know, in our region, our soil type is very sandy, so we have a lot of oxidation of the organic matter. How we can improve our organic matter in Northwest Michigan? You know, it's very sandy. So it's a very basic question, but very topic probably.
Could you repeat your question?
Yes, sir. As you know, in Northwest Michigan or Southwest, the soil type is very sandy, so we have a lot of oxidation of organic matter. So my question is how we can improve our soil with organic matter, because we add organic matter and they oxidize within 2-3 years. So I would like to increase the fertility of the soil and keep the organic matter in soil.
All right. So the question is, how can we improve the soil carbon level in the sandy soils, and especially in some part of Michigan? So that's a really interesting question. There's a number of ways you can do it. You can plant cover crops, and but let me just talk about biochar. You can add a biochar to the soils to improve the soil carbon level. However, right now in current market, it's going to be very expensive. So I don't know many people going to actually mix the biochar over the entire field. So that really brings up a very interesting concept that has been talked about and promoted in last few years. So really, I think I kind of talked about earlier. So if you want to grow crops from sandy soils, when you want to use biochar, it's really important you just apply the biochar around the plant roots. So you really just want to apply the biochar as close to the roots as possible in the root zone. So you don't have to apply biochar somewhere else. So if we can find ways to just apply the biochar in the root zone, which is the rhizosphere, as we call it in our community. So I think that's really beneficial because you can reduce substantially the amount of biochar you need to apply to a certain field, and also you just directly affect the plant roots. So So over time, that's going to not only increase your carbon level, it's also going to support the sustained growth or crop production on that land.
Thank you.
So I look at the question box. So there's Tom asked a question about how much biochar would be needed to add to annual 2 tons production of compost to make a positive improvement, a difference. So that's a really good question. I think it really depends on the compost you have and what do you want to use with that biochar compost. So the ratio can vary depending on how you plan to use it. And I cannot come up with the number off my head, but I think there's some information we can look into about that. So, so Tom, if you follow up with me, I can share with you some information on that. And then the second question from Chantal. Okay, so it's about the site-specific use of biochar. And also the immobilize certain micronutrients. Yeah, I think that's really important. So that also kind of show me what I didn't know before. So I didn't know the zinc is a short supply for growing grapes, and so I didn't know that some of the vineyard may actually suffer a zinc deficiency. So that's so that's a really interesting question to ask. What is the special needs with a viticulture or vineyard? And we can kind of design or look into that. Design some study to look into that. Right now, we don't have actually an ongoing project to look into that. So is there any more question from the audience? And I really want to know what are your challenges, what your needs are, and how we can help with.
There is one more in the question box. I don't know if you can see that.
Oh yeah. Oh.
From Judith, and then another from Adina.
Oh yeah. So Judith, you asked about how biochar compare with the natural decomposition, say grass or leaves in the area. So that's a really nice question. A great question is actually there's actually I would say a heated debate about whether you should just return the biomass into the soil, like incorporating the crop residue into the soil, or actually you apply the biochar. And I think the question isn't being settled depending on which camp you talk to. Some people can talk about all the good things with incorporation of the crop residue into the soil directly without making biochar. And then some people actually can talk a lot of good things about biochar. And I guess you have to particularly look at the system and what your goal is, because the fresh biomass can be decomposed pretty fast. So if you are looking from the standpoint of increase the soil carbon level, and it will be much quicker to increase carbon level by adding biochar, because that carbon is very stable. So it's not going to decompose as fast as a fresh biomass. And then of course, the molecules released by that decomposition of a fresh mass is going to be totally different from molecule released by biochar. So the other benefits I want to say with the biochar is actually you can use it as a nutrient carrier. As I said earlier, one benefit of charging your biochar is to actually store the nutrients in the biochar, which can be released over time. So there's a lot of innovative ways of doing things on biochar, which is probably not possible with a fresh biomass. And Dina has a question about where we can order ready-to-use biochar. How long does it hold its value in the field? Those are the well. The first question is an easy or difficult one, and I think right now, as I said earlier, you can buy some biochar on Amazon even, but those are very expensive. So if you just doing home gardening, and you can buy it from Amazon, but if you're doing it on a larger scale, I think that comes very expensive, because I think the price right now they're selling the biochar on Amazon is too high for it to be used at a larger scale. And there's some efforts in the United States about larger scale production biochar, but as I said earlier, the economics right now is not in the favor of for the viability of those kind of business. But if you can make some innovative products with biochar, for example, biochar fertilizer, now you can sell a little bit higher price. So that may be a sustainable way of growing that business. And of course, you can, if you just think about doing it yourself, and you can possibly make some biochar in your backyard using some of those low-tech methods. The second question, how long does it hold its value in field? I think that one is even more challenging. It's a kind of a $1 million question. I really don't know. I know a little bit chemistry about biochar. I know the carbon is going to be there for a very long time, probably 100 years. And then the question comes whether the biochar goes to stay there, because it's going to be defragmented or kind of become smaller or weathered over time. So those fine biochar particles are going to be washed away or leached away by water. So that's why people think that you may have to reapply the biochar after a number of years. To me, I think that's even make it more attractive to use a biochar-based fertilizer, because you just need to apply a very small amount, apply it around the roots, and then you can apply it every year. So there's some anecdotal evidence suggesting that you can cut your fertilizer use by half if you combine the chemical fertilizer with the biochar. But I think that it still needs to be studied. Yes, Judith, the biomass decomposition is converted to convert carbon to carbon dioxide by bacteria. So that's right. Tom has a question about whether we need to grind the biochar piece if they're larger than 3 to 5 centimeter. Well, Tom, I really don't have a lot of expertise with composting, and I think just think aloud. I think that would be better, because if you can kind of economically work conveniently without a lot of efforts to make a biochar particle a little bit smaller, that's better. But I also understand there's challenging of grinding biochars, and there's a cost associated with that. So I don't know in the end whether the benefits justify the cost. But I think either way, that should be fine. If you add a 3 to 5 centimeter, because actually the biochar going to be kind of broken up over time, probably even during the composting, and the larger particle going to be fragmented over time.
Hi, Wei. This is Andy. I finally I was able to overcome some technical difficulties, and kind of found the back way in here. So I caught kind of the second half. I apologize for missing the first half, but we're of course very happy to have you and all that. And I do have a couple questions. I can only ask them. I cannot type them because I'm part of the panel here. So I saved some of the grape cane prunings from my vineyard and pushed them out and made a big pile this year. and I was hoping to attempt to make some biochar out of that. Are there some websites or some literature out there that you could point us towards for kind of making it, or starting to play around with this method?
Sure, sure. I actually, this is a website I recommend. The Ithaka Institute. It's in Switzerland. So the Peter Hans Skimmett, he's a well-known expert on biochar, and there's tons of information, very useful information from that website. If you go to that website and look through the biochar section, you can actually see a lot of information. On my slides are coming from that website, and so I highly recommend you to check out this Ithaka journal tonight, or just search like Ithaka Institute. I think I have a picture. Let's see here. So Ithaka Institute, just search that one. And it actually has a lot of videos and presentations to teach you how to produce biochar using like a low-tech, like a backyard method. And so that's really nice information. I think last year we were supposed to see Peter Hans at the Nanjing, China, because there was a biochar conference organized by a researcher there. But Peter Hans got some problem in Hong Kong, so he couldn't, because of visa issues, he couldn't join us. So it was a pity for me, so I didn't get to see him. But I highly recommend his work, because he did a lot of work in both developed countries and developing countries, working with different systems. So I'm sure you will find information very useful by looking at his website.
What was his name again?
Peter Hans Skimmett. So last name is Skimmett. So last name is Skimmett. Peter Hans. Yeah. And if you search Ithaka Institute, you will find that website.
One more question that I have here do you know if the Swiss Institute, are they the ones doing that that first slide, the project with the compost and the biochar blended with the legume? Are they still doing research? Is that ongoing?
I think they're still doing research. I think Peter Hans Skimmett is still publishing papers. So I think, and I also there's a person working as a postdoc at that institute. So I met that person in Switzerland last year. So I think they're pretty active on research. But I don't know whether they are the first one to mix biochar with a lagoon, like a manure lagoon effluent. But I think you made a very good point that mixing manure with biochar is a pretty good way of doing it. So there are some ways you can, depending on particular situations, there's different way of doing that. I think some people even suggesting that you can just spread biochar into the like a manure, like the lagoon, or spread the biochar into the septic tank. I think depending on a particular setting, you have to be a little bit mindful about the solid liquid ratio. You want to make sure that you give enough time that all the water and the nutrients in the manure can be absorbed by the biochar.
A lot of folks up here are starting to and have been applying compost to their vineyards, and perhaps even compost blends. They might have other things like fresh manure mixed in with them, or maybe wood ash mixed in with them, and various things. So if we were to, if we were about to make a compost application, but we wanted to add some biochar to it, how long would we have to mix the biochar and let it rest with the compost before, to get it activated all the way and allow it to be ready to apply?
So, well, so I think if the composting is happening, you would just mix biochar, allow the process to take all the way to the end, right? And then you just apply the mixed compost and biochar together. And then if it's you already have a compost, and then now you have a biochar, so they are separately produced, and now you want to mix them. So at least you should give at least about 14 days, and make sure you give enough water. So they are kind of virtualized. Because the water is the key, because the water is the carrier of the nutrients, for the nutrients to move into the inner pore of the biochar.
We do have one more question from Tom, the participant who's raised his hand, so I'm going to allow him to talk.
Sure.
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, good. So for both Andy and Dr. Zhang, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I've been thinking of trying to make some biochar from my burnt canes, and of course the challenge is turning off the burning at the right time, so that there is char left and not ashes.
Right.
And I was thinking of just spraying it lightly, trying to get the timing just right, and that might take some experience. But assuming that I get, the char that I want, I collect that. If it's too big, I might run it through a shredder. But I would add it and layer it in my annual compost build each year. So I make about 2 tons, and it takes about 12 months to work,
So,
and I add the water as well.
So Tom, you may need to explain to me a little more. Is there a way you can actually shred it before making the char, or you have to shred it after the char is being made? Because the reason I'm talking about that is when after char is made, if you shred it, maybe there's some fire hazard associated with it. So you want to be a little bit careful to shred the charcoal. But I guess if you do it right and safely, that may be no issue. But there are potential risks with that. The other thing is, you may produce a better char when the particle size of the feedstock, like the biomass, is smaller.
You raise a very good point. This year, I was successful in shredding a large portion of my cane prunings, and it worked out quite well. And if I charred that, but again, getting it to cool down at the right time so that I actually have the char and not ashes is critical. I'm used to burning the canes. I'm not used to burning the shredded canes. So it'll be an experimental process. But yeah, my fear of shredding the char itself is that it'll end up in a lot of dust, and I lose a large proportion of it.
Right.
To the air
that's
and
another
dust.
point. Yep. Yeah, I think that's another point. Yep. I wouldn't too worry about that, whether you get an ash or char. But unless you really want to maximize your char production, even retaining ash to your soil is beneficial, because that's the natural way of regenerating soil system, right? I mean, the vegetation got burned, so all the mineral nutrients got returned to the soil, so unless you're doing a rigorous scientific study, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'll share any results that I can decipher over time with you and P45, of course.
Sure, thank you.
So
Thanks, Tom. One more question.
Yeah. So My question is about water holding capacity. If the biochar can affect the increase or decrease the water holding capacity in our soil, because it's one of our concerns here in some area, the water holding capacity of the soil.
So the question is about the water retention capacity of the soil when adding chars. And so that's a really great question. I think that there are a lot of, well, in general, people think about adding chars to soil going to improve the water retention capacity. But it also depends on the property of the soil and also where that char is applied. So that gets to my point that you really need to apply the char near the plant roots. Because if you are in a sandy soil, you apply a char with very fine pores, and which can strongly absorb the water over time. So if that char is not close to the plant roots, you are actually pulling the water from the plant roots to that char materials. So in that case, your water retention capacity of the field is improved, but that water is not available to the plant roots. So I think it's really important to make sure that that char is applied to the area near the plant roots. So if you're doing like a well mixed situation, I mean that may be possible. But if you have any like a heterogeneous or uneven distribution of the char material in the field, in the sandy field, you may actually create a situation that the water is absorbed by the char, but it's not available to the plants. So there's some really interesting soil physics problem to be looked at. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, if that's all the questions, we want to give a huge virtual round of applause to Dr. Zhang for sharing his knowledge and joining us today. So thank you, Dr. Zhang, for joining.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Annette. And I thank you all the attendees, because this is also a wonderful opportunity for me. So I learned there's some zinc deficiency problem in some vineyard soil in Michigan. So that's great. If we can help with anything, let us know. And also I got to learn there's strong interest in the community about using biochar. So I really appreciate that. With that, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Annette and Ishmael, I'm sorry to go over this again, but I was gone for the beginning, and did you guys get a chance to introduce each other? And I have a couple quick P45 things too.
No, we didn't. I'm sorry, I was a little distracted.
Yeah, we got introduced to each other. I think I'm fine to leave now, so you can have the room.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andy.
Yep, thank you. So I would like to, as you have virtually met, bye-bye. Ishmael, I'm gonna struggle with your last name, Ishmael, but he is the Northwest Grape Extension appointee, and he's just joining us this month. And so we welcome you to the region. And did you have any announcements you want to make, Ishmael, about any, how do we reach you? There's a lot of challenges right now, of course, for you to be involved and connected directly face to face with us as you might normally be. But if you want to just talk a little bit about what you're hoping to do in the near future, we'd love to hear it.
Sure. So thank you, Andy. My name is Ismail Nasrullahi Azhar. I know my last name is complicated to pronounce for you. So I just started my new job on Monday, so it was my first week. So I'm planning to visit the vineyard in the next 2-3 months in person, because I really like to visit and learn and become more familiar about the area and great production challenges for many other things. So yeah, I'm here to, I mean, in a nutshell, to increase the revenue of the vineyard, so decrease the cost and increase the food quality. And I'm joining the team with a lot of experience, and I hope I can share my experience and knowledge with you and learn at the same time, because I believe it's part of the solution is among the growers. So I really respect your knowledge and experience, and I would like to learn about this experience. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So everyone still with us can clearly see his email address there at the bottom of that slide. So that is how we're going to communicate with Ishmael for now, and we are going to bring him in to P45 as well, and kind of get him up to speed on some of the things that we're doing and hoping to do in the future. There are certainly some challenges with meeting and holding meetings, but as I alluded to in the last webinar, we are working out some details where we can hopefully do an outdoor field meeting followed by a small happy hour like we've done in the past. So we're still kind of working out details on that, where, when. We have some open dates. We are trying to confirm a few speakers for the next couple of weeks. We don't have any official announcements just yet, but we are working hard towards that. It's a very busy time for all of us. Every single board member is strapped with bottling or lots of vineyard work right now, but we are trying to finalize a couple things there. Hopefully we can get some more great speakers in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to, about the webinars or future plans for P45, please feel free to email one of the board members and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So Annette, do you have any announcements about the credits?
Yeah, just a reminder that you do not have to fill out, obviously, the traditional bubble sheet. Jen and I will do that behind the scenes, and we can tell who's been on this webinar today. But you may want to record the code number just to make sure that you got credit if you're in this for credits. That's the code number there, and the date, of course. This session, each session is worth 1 credit. And then if you are seeking certified crop advisor, just scan the QR code on the right and it will take you right to the website.
Okay, great. Stay tuned for future announcements that all P45 members will get via email, but we're going to stick to those dates for now, and we hope to see you in the future. Thank you to Annette, thank you to Ishmael, and thank you to Dr. Zhang again.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, have a good weekend.